Determination. In 1883, a creative engineer named John Roebling was inspired by an idea to build a spectacular bridge connecting New York with the Long Island. However, bridge-building experts throughout the world thought that this was an impossible feat and told Roebling to forget the idea. Just could not be done. It was not practical. It had never been done before. Roebling could not ignore the vision he had in his mind of this bridge. He thought about it all the time and he knew deep in his heart that it could be done. He just had to share the dream with someone else. After much discussion and persuasion, he managed to convince his son Washington, an up-and-coming engineer, that the bridge in fact could be built. Working together for the first time, the father and son developed concepts of how it could be accomplished and how the obstacles could be overcome. With great excitement and inspiration, and the headiness of a wild challenge before them, they hired their crew and began to build their dream bridge. The project started well, but when it was only a few months underway, a tragic accident on the site took the life of John Roebling. Washington was injured and left with a certain amount of brain damage, which resulted in him not being able to walk or talk or even move. We told them so. Crazy men and their crazy dreams. It's foolish to chase wild visions. Everyone had a negative comment to make and felt that the project should be scrapped since the Roeblings were the only ones who knew how the bridge. He tried to inspire and pass on his enthusiasm to some of his friends, but they were too daunted by the task. As he lay on his bed in his hospital room, with the sunlight streaming through the windows, a gentle breeze blew the flimsy white curtains apart and he was able to see the sky and the tops of the trees outside for just a moment. It seemed that there was a message for him not to give up. Suddenly an idea hit him. All he could do was move one finger and he decided to make the best use of it. By moving this, he slowly developed a code of communication with his wife. He touched his wife's arm with that finger, indicating to her that he wanted her to call the engineers again. Then he used the same method of tapping her arm to tell the engineers what to do. It seemed foolish, but the project was underway again. For 13 years Washington tapped out his instructions with his finger on his wife's arm, until the bridge was finally completed. Today the spectacular Brooklyn Bridge stands in all its glory as a tribute to the triumph of one man's indomitable spirit and his determination not to be defeated by circumstances. It is also a tribute to the engineers and their teamwork, and to their faith in a man who was considered mad by half the world. It stands too as a tangible monument to the love and devotion of his wife, who for 13 long years patiently decoded the messages of her husband and told the engineers what to do. Perhaps this is one of the best examples of a never-say-die attitude that overcomes a terrible physical handicap and achieves an impossible goal. Often when we face obstacles in our day-to-day life, our hurdles seem very small in comparison to what many others have to face. The Brooklyn Bridge shows us that dreams The cracked pot. Once upon a time there was a water bearer in India who had 2 large pots, each hung on each end of a pole which he carried across his neck. One of the pots had a crack in it, and while the other pot was perfect and always delivered a full portion of water at the end of the long walk from the stream to the master's house, the cracked pot arrived only half full. For a full 2 years this went on daily, with the bearer delivering only 1.5 pot full of water in his master's house. Of course, the perfect pot was proud of its accomplishments, perfect to the end for which it was made. But the poor cracked pot was ashamed of its own imperfection, and miserable that it was able to accomplish only half of what it had been made to do. After 2 years of what it perceived to be a bitter failure, it spoke to the water-bearer one day by the stream. "I am ashamed of myself and I want to apologize to you." "Why?" asked the bearer. "What are you ashamed of?" "I have been able for these past 2 years to deliver only half my load because this crack in my side causes water to leak out all the way back to your master's house. Because of my flaws you have to do all of this work and you don't get full value from your efforts," the pot said. The water-bearer felt sorry for the old cracked pot, and in his compassion he said, "As we return to the master's house, I want you to notice the beautiful flowers along the path." Indeed, as they went up the hill, the old cracked pot took notice of the sun warming the beautiful wild flowers on the side of the path, and this cheered it some. But at the end of the trail it still felt bad because it had leaked out half its load, and so again it apologized to the bearer for its failure. The bearer said to the pot, "Did you notice that there were flowers only on your side of your path, but not on the other pot's side? That's because I've always known about your flaw, and I took advantage of it. I planted flower seeds on your side of the path, and every day while we walk back from the stream, you've watered them. For 2 years I have been able to pick these beautiful flowers to decorate my master's table. Without you being just the way you are, he would not have the God exists. A man went to a barbershop to have his hair and his beard cut as always. He started to have a good conversation with the barber who attended him. They talked about so many things on various subjects. Suddenly they touched the subject of God. The barber said, "Look man, I don't believe that God exists as you say so." "Why do you say that?" asked the client. "Well, it's so easy. You just have to go out in the street to realize that God does not exist." "Oh, tell me, if God existed, would there be so many sick people? Would there be abandoned children? If God existed, there would be neither suffering nor pain. I can't think of a God who permits all of these things." The client stopped for a moment thinking, but he didn't want to respond so as to prevent an argument. The barber finished his job and the client went out of the shop. Just after he left the barber shop, he saw a man in the street with a long hair and beard. It seems that it had been a long time since he had his cut and he looked so untidy. Then the client again entered the barber shop and he said to the barber, "Know what? Barbers do not exist." "How come they don't exist?" asked the barber. "Well, I am here and I am a barber." "No," the client exclaimed. "They don't exist because if they did there would be no people with long hair and beard like that man who walks in the street." "Ah, barbers do exist. What happens is that people do not come to us." "Exactly," affirmed the client. A boy with strong belief. Sheikh Fath al-Mosali relates, "Once I saw a young boy walking through the jungle. It appeared as if he was uttering some words. I greeted him with salam and he replied accordingly. I inquired, 'Where are you going?' He retorted, 'To the house of Allah, Mecca.' I further asked, 'What are you reciting?' 'The Quran,' he replied. I remarked, 'You are at a tender age. It is not an obligation that you are required to fulfill.' He said, 'I have witnessed death approach people younger than me and therefore would like to prepare if death was to knock on my door.' I astoundingly commented, 'Your steps are small and your destination far.' He responded, 'My duty is to take the step and it remains the responsibility of Allah to take me to my destination.' I continued to ask, 'Where is your provision and conveyance, means of transport?' He replied, 'My yaqeen belief, is my provision and my feet are my conveyance. I explained, I am asking you regarding bread and water. He replied, O Sheikh, if someone invited you to his house, would it be appropriate to take your own food? I exclaimed, No. Similarly, my Lord has invited his servant to his house. It is only the weakness of your yaqeen that makes us carry provisions. Despite this, do you think Allah will let me go to waste? Never, I replied. He then left. Some time later I a very powerful story. He remembered his grandmother's warning about praying on time. My son, you shouldn't leave prayer to this late time. His grandmother's age was 70, but whenever she heard the adhan, she got up like an arrow and performed salah namaz/prayer. He, however, could never win over his ego to get up and pray. Whatever he did, his salah was always the last to be offered, and he prayed it quickly to get it in on time. Thinking of this, he got up and realized that there were only 15 minutes left before Salatul Isha. He quickly made wudu and performed Salatul Maghrib. While making tasbih, he again remembered his grandmother and was embarrassed by how he had prayed. His grandmother prayed with such tranquility and peace. He began making dua and went down to make sajda and stayed like that for a while. He had been at school all day and was tired, so tired. He awoke abruptly to the sound of noise and shouting. He was sweating profusely. He looked around. It was very crowded. Every direction he looked in was filled with people. Some stood frozen looking around, some were running left and right, and some were on their knees with their heads in their hands just waiting. Pure fear and apprehension filled him as he realized where he was. His heart was about to burst. It was the day of judgment. When he was alive, he had heard many things about the questioning on the Day of Judgment, but that seemed so long ago. Could this be something his mind made up? No, the weight and the fear were so great that he could not have imagined this. The interrogation was still going on. He began moving frantically from people to ask if his name had been called. No one could answer him. All of a sudden his name was called and the crowd split into two and made a passageway for him. Two people grabbed his arms and led him forward. He walked with unknowing eyes through the crowd. The angels brought him to the center and left him there. His head was bent down and his whole life was passing in front of his eyes like a movie. He opened his eyes but saw only another world. The people were all helping others. He saw his father running from one lecture to the other, spending his wealth in the way of Islam. His mother invited guests to their house and one table was being set while the other was being cleared. He pleaded his case. I too was always on this path. I helped others. I spread the word of Allah. I performed my salah. I fasted in the month of Ramadan. Whatever Allah ordered us to do, I did. Whatever He ordered us not to do, I did not. He began to cry and think about how much he loved Allah. He knew that whatever he had done in life would be less than what Allah deserved, and his only protector was Allah. He was sweating like never before and was shaking all over. His eyes were fixed on the scale, waiting for the final decision. At last the decision was made. The two angels with sheets of paper in their hands turned to the crowd. His legs felt like they were going to collapse. He closed Jahannam. I served others all my life. I spread the word of Allah to others. His eyes had become blurry and he was shaking with sweat. The two angels took him by the arms. As his feet dragged, they went through the crowd and advanced toward the blazing flames of Jahannam. He was yelling and wondered if there was any person who was going to help him. He was yelling of all the good deeds he had done, how he had helped his father, his fasts, prayers, the Quran that he read. He was asking if none of them would help him. The Jahannam angels continued to drag him. They had got 10 closer to the hellfire. He looked back and these were his last pleas. Had not Rasulullah said, "How clean would a person be who bathes in a river 5 times a day? So too does the salah performed 5 times cleanse someone of their sins?" He began yelling, "My prayers? My prayers? My prayers!" The 2 angels did not stop, and they came to the edge of the abyss of Jahannam. The flames of the fire were burning his face. He looked back one last time, but his eyes were dry of hope and he had nothing left in him. One of the angels pushed him and he found himself in the air and falling towards the flames. He had just fallen 5 or 6 feet when a hand grabbed him by the arm and pulled him back. He lifted his head and saw an old man with a long white beard. He wiped some dust off himself and asked him, "Who are you?" The old man replied, "I am your prayers. Why are you so late? I was almost in the fire. You rescued me at the last minute before I fell in." The old man smiled and shook his head. "You always performed me at the last minute, and did you forget?" At that instant, he blinked and lifted his head from sajda. He was in a sweat. He listened to the voices coming from outside. He heard words and actions should be the same. There once was a boy who loved eating sweets. He always asked for sweets from his father. His father was a poor man. He could not always afford sweets for his son. But the little boy did not understand this, and demanded sweets all the time. The boy's father thought hard about how to stop the child asking for so many sweets. There was a very holy man living nearby at that time. The boy's father had an idea. He decided to take the boy to the great man who might be able to persuade the child to stop asking for sweets all the time. The boy and his father went along to the great man. The father said to him, "O great saint, could you ask my son to stop asking for sweets which I cannot afford?" The great man was in difficulty because he likes sweets himself. How could he ask the boy to give up asking for sweets? The holy man told the father to bring his son back after 1 month. During that month, the holy man gave up eating sweets, and when the boy and his father returned, after a month, the holy man said to the boy, "My dear child, will you stop asking for sweets which your father cannot afford to give you?" From then on, the boy stopped asking for sweets. The boy's father asked the saint, "Why did you not ask me, son, to give up asking for sweets when we came to you a month ago?" The saint replied, "How could I ask a boy to give up sweets when I loved sweets myself? In the last month I gave up eating sweets." A person's example is much more powerful than just his words. When we ask someone to do something, we must do it ourselves also. We should not ask others to do what we do not do ourselves. Always make sure that your actions and your words are same.